Hey everyone, welcome to Jira for Scrum Masters. Today we're doing our August cohort here, our second time we're teaching this particular class. So welcome to everybody. Giving a couple of minutes here for people to join. Very excited to be here. I'm very excited. I love this topic. I love specifically talking about Jira for Scrum Masters because we all know how to use Jira, but there's this very specific kind of like a path, if you will, of how to use Jira effectively, right? So that you can communicate, so you can collaborate better. And that's what this course is all about. It's to not just show you the basics of Jira, but to really give you the little levers that you can pull, the little secrets, the gotchas that are not necessarily hidden, but maybe just not as well known within Jira that you as a Scrum Master can leverage to really kick up your team's like effectivity to the next level. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. While I get things ready, if you can all just tell us where are you tuning in from? I have Ronnie, the Jira guy. He is joining me here behind the scenes. We are monitoring the chat, so feel free to let us know where you're at. Let me know if you're a Scrum Master. Raise your hand. Let us know here in the comment section or in the chat. Are you currently a Scrum Master? What is your role in your company? Are you a Scrum Master? You're a product owner? Are you a project manager? Are you some sort of a executive, director? Just let me know what kind of a user are you using Jira, and it will help me tailor the presentation ever so slightly. So again, while I get my Jira up and running here, just let us know here so that we can get a better feel for how I can make sure I cover specific use cases. All right, so as those chats are coming in, good morning, Susan from New Mexico. We got a Scrum Master from Bosnia and new Jira user. All right, so welcome, Matas235. I hope you find this training beneficial. I'm excited. This is one of my favorite things to do. I've been a Scrum Master, so just to give you a little bit of background, I started off as a Jira admin. I started off as an administrator of Jira, and then about halfway through my tenure as an admin, I got changed into a Scrum Master role. And I actually wasn't using Jira. And then I realized, hey, we have a lot of problems here. We have a lot of communication problems. So let me go use my Jira tool that I had been managing, and I brought it and introduced it to my team. And I was really able to customize and leverage the power of Jira to help drive teams deliver. So very, very fun and a lot of exciting stuff that you can do here with Jira. So we're just going to jump into it now. So for everybody who's tuning in, let me know, again, where you're from, your role right now. Are you a Scrum Master, product owner, things of that nature? It's really beneficial to understand who's who in the zoo so that I can address there's specific things that I can say throughout the next 50 or so minutes that we're going to be together to make sure that I cover some bases for you all. So again, thank you to everybody that's been participating. Let's just jump into some slides and we'll cover some of these critical things. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this is Jira for Scrum Masters, although it really applies to a lot of different people, but I'm just essentially going to show you how to effectively use Jira, right? And this is not like a beginner's type of thing. I mean, it's a little beginners, but it's going to be a little bit more advanced. So I'm not going to teach you what a board is. I'm not going to teach you how to start a sprint. We're going to get into, now that we have a sprint, how do we plan a sprint effectively, right? And things of that nature. So we're going to get a little bit more tactical in our execution of how we use Jira. We'll cover the roadmap. We'll talk about releases, epics, stories, tasks, backlog refinement, planning your sprint, executing your sprint. And I normally don't have a lot of time. Usually it's a lot of material to cover within a 60-minute bounds, but we'll try to get to like something like the reports at the very, very end, but we'll see how far we can get. A little bit about me, though, before we get too far into it. As you know already, I've been a Jira admin for a while, and I've been both a Jira admin and a Scrum Master in a Scrum Master capacity using Jira to drive teams to be very effective in the delivery of products. And so a little bit more education. I have a bachelor's in computer engineering, a master's in systems engineering. I currently do now have one ACP, the ACP 520, and I'm actively in the fall, so in about 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to be starting my training for ACP 120. So very soon, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll add another ACP to that belt. As I mentioned, I've been in the Atlassian ecosystem for a while now, specifically Halloween 2016. So coming up on an anniversary here in a couple of months. I'm very, very excited for that. I love Jira. I use Jira 12 hours a day, every single day, all day. I'm like, I like to tell people I spend an unhealthy amount of time in Jira. So hopefully that comes across in this training. If you can't scan that QR code, we have a couple of YouTube channels here available for you. This specific YouTube channel, this is called the Jira Life. So if you haven't already hit that subscribe button, we are growing this community. So we're about 1,300 or so subscribers. So if you're watching this training and you haven't subscribed, it would help us tremendously if you took a second here and just smash the subscribe button to help this channel grow. I also, you may recognize my face because I have a different YouTube channel called ATech Tech Tutorials, where I basically have like 600-700 videos where I teach you how to use Jira. And so if you haven't gone to that channel, again, scan that QR code, go and subscribe to that channel because there's hundreds and hundreds of videos that are already ready for you to basically learn how to use Jira. And so a lot of cool stuff. Additionally, I do have a book. So scan that QR code. We have a book. We have merch. We have paid courses, free courses. There's just a ton of resources for you. So make sure you check out that URL there. So now, without any further ado, let's just jump into it. This is probably going to be the last time we see the slides. I typically only keep the slides here on the side just to help keep me on track on the topics. But we're going into Jira. We're going to jump into Jira, and we are going to exclusively basically just be inside of Jira because there's no better way to learn Jira than to be in Jira. Now, a couple of disclaimers then before we get too far here. One, I've been like, I think the area that I moved to is killing me. So this cough is like seriously not going away. So hopefully I'll try not to blow your ears out. But second, we're in Jira Cloud. Now, what I'm about to show you, what I'm about to detail to you, should be applicable if you're in data center or in the cloud. I'll try not to mention things that just aren't appropriate, but I don't spend a whole lot of time in the data center version of Jira. So Rodney is here to keep me honest and make sure that whatever I tell you is or isn't applicable. But for the most part, I would say 90-95% of what we're going to be learning today should be applicable regardless of which version of Jira you're on. All right. But if your UI doesn't look like this, again, it's probably because you're not in the cloud. So make sure you're on the cloud. Second, if you want to follow along, do pull up your Jira and maybe you have a sample dummy project. You can be able to do some of these things here. And you'll be able to follow along just fine. Okay, so here we are inside of a Jira software project, a couple of baselining, like setting expectations. What are we looking at right now? So we are inside of a company managed, as seen down here in the bottom left corner, company managed Jira software project. This is very critical. I want to start off making sure everybody's understanding this because when you look at the project templates, right, when you go to Jira and you go to create a project, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of templates. Even within software development, there's a couple of different ones, service management, work management, right? There's just so many different templates, right? So many different products. But within Jira software, the two more popular ones are Kanban and Scrum. For what I'm about to show you, in case you can't read between the lines or read the title of the video, right? This is for Scrum Master. So if you had to guess which of the two templates we're going to be using, spoilers, it's going to be the Scrum Master one, right? So, or sorry, the Scrum one. So my project specifically, not only is it a software project, not only is it a company, but I have also selected the Scrum template as that's what's going to allow us to use Jira in a, and I think I might be inventing a word here, in a Scrumful way. Okay. So if you try to use it, if you try to do what I'm about to teach you in Kanban, it's not going to work as well. You really do need the Scrum template of your board so that it works better. Now, whether you're in company or team managed, that's a little bit less relevant. Both will work for you mostly. Full disclosure, I never use team managed projects. Those are like, I avoid those like the plague. If you want all the bells and whistles, everything I'm going to teach you today, I think something like components you don't have in the team managed project. So I am going to be talking about components. And so if you see a couple things that just don't align, it's either you're in data center or you're in team managed version or you're on a Kanban board. And so you're going to want to make sure you understand this, right? So I'm in a software company managed Scrum project. All right. So that's how we've landed here. This is the baseline. This is where we're all starting out from, right? So if you don't have those three things, your experience is going to vary a little bit. All right. So now that we have that, now that we've basically covered those bases and everybody now understands where I'm coming from. Let's talk about the timeline. Why the timeline? In this, as a Scrum Master, you're like, Alex, why aren't we in the backlog? Well, I love to start at the timeline level because even though we as Scrum Masters, and I'm going to be putting on my Scrum Master hat for this training, right? But even though it's us as Scrum Masters, we don't necessarily care too much about the timeline, right? We're not product managers, right? We're not the people that are the visionaries. We're not the folks that are setting the stories and the epics and creating all that stuff, right? We're not requirements creators, right? But it's important for you to understand the power of the timeline, because as a Scrum Master, I see myself as the role of the Scrum Master as a conductor of an orchestra, right? You kind of sit here in the middle, and everybody else is playing the instruments, right? Everybody else is doing their thing in their domains of expertise, but you have to be expertise enough or have enough experience in all the different domains so that you can kind of conduct, right? So you can orchestrate everybody else, right? And so it's important, I think, as a Scrum Master to at least understand what are the different tools and features that are available in Jira so that you as a Scrum Master can communicate more effectively. And I like to start at the timeline mainly because I'm a systems engineer. I'm all about that top-down design, right? I love to start really, really big, really, really ambiguous, big problems, and decompose, and get down to some granular, very detailed, very specific work, right? And the timeline is my favorite view to kind of see what it is what it is a team needs to build, right? The timeline basically builds a roadmap. It's the vision, it's the strategy. It's like, what is the team expected to build? Because as a Scrum Master, my job is to help organize, right? Help conduct that team and get them going, right? Get them all marching in that same direction. And this timeline is our North Star. This determines which way are we going? Where am I supposed to take my teams? What are we supposed to be working on? And if you're not leveraging your timeline, right, even though again you as a Scrum Master don't necessarily need to put things in here. That's for your product managers, your product owners to do. But it's important for you to understand what it is you're seeing here so that you can leverage the information here to help you be more effective when we go into the backlog. So a couple of things to note, again, just as a Scrum Master, what's in here? What's valuable in here? Well, number one, again, top down, we're looking at epics. Our epics are not things that we plan to sprints, but our timeline here is rankable. And so when it comes time to, what should our team work on next? Right? Well, the timeline, because it's rankable, because I can move my epics up and down, your product managers, your product owners, they should be able to determine that priority, right? So not you as a Scrum Master, but somebody else in a different role. Maybe it is you, it depends on your company, right? But typically the traditional way is that somebody else, like your product managers, they're the ones that are setting these priorities, right? They're setting the vision and the order in which work needs to be completed. And so this timeline view will give you a good appreciation for the epics that need to be completed in the specific order. It will also, if you look over here under releases, it'll give you milestones, right? So if I have any milestones in here, which I don't think I do, but if I did, I would be able to see specific dots, right? Points in time where these are my deadlines, right? This is by when we need to get certain things done, and we're going to be able to see again that roadmap. Now, not meant to be dead yet makes a good point here of timeline is not available in a project for DC. That is a really good call out. What I will say, if I'm not mistaken, you all have the roadmap project portfolio, I think is what it's called, inside Data Center. We have it in the cloud too. It's called an advanced roadmap or a jar or a plan. Check out my training from last week if you're more interested in that. But you should have something that looks like this in Data Center, where it's a lot more sophisticated. Definitely out of scope for this call, but not meant to be another. If you guys are on Data Center and you're like, hey, I don't have a timeline view, technically you don't have the basic, but you do have this advanced version. So I would go check this one out, because a lot of what I just described is applicable here. I just need a couple of things, and this basic view does exactly what I need. And so, yeah, so you may have to go use that. I think it's called a portfolio in Data Center. Anyways, so this view, all we want to see here is the order of the epics. This is very important. And when those epics are due. So we're going to see that information if we look at our roadmap in this view. we'll see the deadlines for all these epics. So all these epics have dates. Again, dates that you don't necessarily control. Someone like your product manager definitely controls for you. But we will be able to see the dates, and we will be able to see releases. So we're, in fact, why don't we just go in here and create a release already, and just do we're just gonna call it August Jira for Scrum Masters, and we're gonna put a release date of tomorrow, right? Just for fun. And so when I go back to my backlog view, you're gonna see. I just wanted to show you what it looks like. It's just a blip. It's just a horizontal line here that essentially allows you to see when are these milestones, because we're gonna leverage this information that's visible, very visible here, right? This view is very easy on the eyes. We're going to leverage a lot of this in the backlog view, which is what we're going to jump into next, right? But these releases are very important because, again, even though you as a Scrum Master don't define them, you will leverage them. You will take advantage of the fact that releases exist because they will help us plan our sprints in a few moments, right? So we got our epics. We have the big picture item. Hopefully those epics have stories underneath, because the stories are what we're going to plan to our sprint in a few moments, right? But it's important to understand, when you're looking at a sea of stories, what epics do they belong to, and what importance are those epics, and what are the due dates of those epics, and what are the releases that everything's doing? Because when we get into the backlog, we'll be able to plan our sprint appropriately based on all these signals that we're receiving, right? And so definitely a very powerful, important view to see, so that, again, when we go into the backlog in a minute, you can appreciate it a little bit more. Now, let's talk a little bit more about releases. So you saw that I created a release here called Jira for Scrum Masters. I will tell you, if you're not using releases today, I think you're missing out. Now, who creates your releases? I'm of the opinion that releases, because they're still roadmap, because they're like the vision, these releases should be created by the same people that are creating the requirements, like your product manager, your product owner. But if you're in a position where you're like, hey, my team's not using releases, well, how do we use releases? Let me give you just the 2-minute abridged version of what a release is. So historically, releases are based for software delivery. So if any of you have an iPhone or an Android, you're probably familiar with all the updates that your phone usually gets, right? And so in a nutshell, that's all a release is, right? It's just a sticker we put on some capabilities that we want to deliver, right? And we put them in a release so that we can kind of group and identify, okay, all of these things that we built, they're part of this package. So think of a release as a package, right? And again, very traditional, you would see something like iOS 18, right? iOS 18.1, iOS 18.2.1, right? Those are the common names for releases. But the releases can be literally anything you want. As you can see here, this is an August Jira for Scrum Masters release, right? And so you can call it whatever you want. The important thing is that you put start dates and end dates. Well, really, the most important thing is the release date, but the start date's important too if you have that information. But the non-negotiable is your release date. You need to have that, right? But once you have these release dates, you can actually create a few, right? So guess what? We're going to have a September Jira for Scrum Masters, right? And that's going to be sometime in September. So I can draw these hypothetical, imaginary, if you will, lines in the sand, that when we look at our timeline, we have these horizontal, literally lines in the sand that tell us, hey, we have until this date to get certain things done. Because as a Scrum Master, that's a huge part of our job, right? We are to organize, to coordinate the team to do the work that needs to be done in time for that release. And so that's super critical that you know when those releases are. Okay. And as an added benefit, when you do use releases, you get a progress bar. So I'm going to go into a story. I'm just going to come into this story right here, and I'm going to add this item to a release. So I'm going to come over here, find my release field. And a little disclaimer, you'll notice that there is no release field. Well, there is. There's a release up top where the development section is, but ignore that. But down here, we have something called fixed versions. That, my friends, is the same thing as release. Why Atlassian doesn't call them the same blows my mind, but it is what it is. And versions, fixed version specifically, is directly correlated with the releases that we were just talking about a minute ago. So I'm going to click in this field, and you're going to see that my 2 releases, or the 2 versions that I created, are in there. I'm going to select August, And when you do that, once you start putting your stories or your epics, subtasks, all of it, anything that you want can go into that release. Then when I go back to my releases section and I go to my August one, you're going to see that that story is in there. You will see a progress report over here on the right side. And you can even do release notes that kind of show you what's in this version. And so this gives you a great summarized view of all the different work that is going to release, which again lets you organize and become more effective as a Scrum Master. So that's the releases bit. Let's talk a little bit about epics, right? So the epics are important. And in my opinion, I think a lot of Scrum training, right? Raise your hand in the chat here. How many of you have your certified Scrum Master or your PSM? I forget what is it, professional Scrum Master? Right? How many of you have either the CSM or the PSM? Let me know in the chat. Additionally, let me know if any of you guys are using SAFe. Any SEPs out there? Let me know in that comment section if you have any of these certifications, right? Because it's important, again, for me to understand that context so that I can gear this conversation a little bit one way or a different way. But anyways, epics are very important. If you've ever taken those CSMs, those PSMs, right, you know the power of stories. We spend so much time in the user story world, but I feel like a lot of the material out there, they kind of brush over epics, right? Like they just say, hey, an epic is a really big story, break it down, right? And that's basically in a nutshell what an epic is. But in Jira, epics are so much more, right? They really have a lot of power. And I don't think if all you ever done is taken like those CSMs, right? We have a few people here, Rashna, Mark, right? A couple people in here, you all have like the CSM, right? So again, you don't really appreciate the power of an epic inside of Jira. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes here to just kind of show you how powerful epics are, because they give you a lot of useful information. Number one, if you can't tell already, when you're in this timeline view in the cloud, the only thing you can create easily is an epic. So if you're not using epics, which again, they're very frowned upon in traditional Scrum Master training, then you're missing out on some pretty key functionality, because you can build out your roadmap using epics. Now, again, you yourself may not be using epics as a Scrum Master. We really do live at the user story level. But these epics are a container. They collect our stories, right? They're not just a really big story, but they should be a piece of work that is usually at least a whole sprint's worth of work, or maybe a couple sprints worth of work. And they also capture or encapsulate the stories that maybe many different team members in a particular sprint may have to contribute to. So epics are really good from that behalf. Second thing is they obviously show up in the timeline here. Third thing, as our stories progress, as the stories underneath these epics progress, we get these progress bars, right? And so as you can see these little blue lines here, these are, if I open an epic up, will show you the percent complete of that epic based on the children. So you get a lot of valuable information. And the epics, when we go into the backlog, you're going to see what powerful role they play over there as well. I already told you that these epics are rankable, which basically means your product managers can tell you, hey, Scrum Master, this is the order in which these epics, thus by association, the stories should be completed in. So they basically give us a cheat code for what needs to be planned to a sprint, right? And so these epics, again, very, very powerful things. But think of an epic as like a feature or capability or a requirement, a big high-level requirement, right? But these things are designed to help us really understand what it is from a high-level perspective that we want to build. They're not just really big stories that need to be decomposed into smaller stories. That's a given. But you can really leverage epics to help classify, bucketize, group your work together. So again, very powerful stuff. If you're not leveraging it already, highly recommend you take another look at epics. Because again, if you just took your CSM, PSMs, you might just not appreciate the power of epics in Jira. They're very, very powerful. So that's the epics, right? And obviously we decompose them, right? The epics, what I will tell you as we're moving into the backlog view here, epics do not go into the backlog. You will not see the epic directly. Now, if you're in a Kanban board, this doesn't apply. Well, this whole training doesn't apply because Jira for Kanban users is very different than Jira for Scrum Masters. But if you're expecting to see mobile 5, mobile 3 in the backlog view when we jump into it in a second, you're going to be very disappointed, because that's all really an epic is, though. It's just a container. It's a sticker we put on stories to help us group and classify our stories together based on like the capability that they are or the functionality that we're trying to build. So that's what epics are. Now, I'm going to take a second here to answer a question. We have a question from KL. What would someone be called that onboards teams to Atlassian tools? They've never used Jira JSM, Confluence, and they track all their tasks in Excel. That's a great question. I would say a project manager. I'm not sure. I think it would vary from company to company. I don't think that there's one specific answer for this, but I would say traditionally it's like a project manager, right? So if somebody's trying to onboard you into Jira, it's usually going to be like a like at a project manager level. But as a Scrum Master, you can definitely help influence your organization as well, right? There's nothing that's stopping you as a Scrum Master saying like, hey, folks, this Excel thing ain't working for us. We should jump over to Jira and take a look over there. All right. So now that we got the timeline, let's talk a little bit about stories, right? Because as we take these epics, I like to do stories in this view, although you have many different ways of creating stories, right? But I like to look at my epics here. And if you hover over an epic, you'll notice that there's a little plus button, right? And if you click on that little plus button, you get to create a story, because a story is a child of an epic, right? Technically, a story, task, or a bug are the children of an epic. But as Scrum Masters, we really mainly focus on those user stories. So we're going to focus on a story, right? And so, again, not something that you would traditionally do as a Scrum Master, but I'm just going to add a couple more stories here just so that this training is a little bit more effective, right? But when we create a story, or someone creates a story for us, this is a great way to keep that parent-child relationship preserved. Because if I create a story in this manner, where I simply click on this little plus button underneath the epic, that will immediately establish in Jira, this story belongs to this epic, right? And so if I create Android version upgrade notes, let's see, publish upgrade notes to customer facing site, right? So when I hit enter, this story, something, it did not like this. I don't have the permission to add. Let me see. Let me send it to me. This is not my project. I just got this Jira, and so I'm playing around with it still. I haven't configured it to my specifications, but there's a brand new Jira, and this is the dummy project that ships with Jira when you sign up for this dummy project. But anyways, as you can see, I was able to create a story, but that relationship is preserved. This mobile 49 is immediately associated to that epic. Most people use the create button, and you can do that. You can definitely do that. And when you create a story over here, right, where it says, I don't know, peer review upgrade notes, right? So when you do it this way and you come down and you create your story, the problem you have is that you now have a story, but it's not on your timeline. It is in your backlog view, but it's now just an orphan at the bottom. And I think in that manner, you lose a little bit of the narrative that you're trying to tell as a Scrum Master, or maybe as a product owner, right? Because we just have stories that just exist, and we lose a little bit of the purpose. Why does your team work on stuff, right? Why do they do things, right? And this is why having those epics is important, because they give your stories purpose. They give you a sense of direction, so that your stories, you're just not working on work, right? Because when you're just working on stories and they're not grouped logically, you're just busy doing work, right? There's no North Star. There's no direction that we're going into. And this is why I love those epics, because they give us that context that we need to be able to organize and structure our team toward this direction. It might not be the right direction, but it's better than not having a direction at all. So when you just create stories just for the sake of creating stories, and no labeling, none of the other stuff we're going to talk about right now, you carry you carry a high risk. You carry a high risk that your team's going to be lost. They're going to be wandering for a while, because these stories are not going to be well written, which basically then transitions us to, what is a good story, right? How should we write good stories, right? And again, not that this is a stories course, right? Because as Scrum Masters, we don't spend a whole lot of time writing stories, but I want you to have an appreciation, if you will, of how stories should work, right? Because stories are going to be our kryptonite. Well, bugs really are Scrum Master's kryptonite, in my opinion, but that's a different topic for another day. But stories, a well-written story by your product manager is going to either be the reason you're successful or the reason you fail, right? Because when these stories are really epics, your team's gonna have a really, really hard time delivering on these stories because they're so big. They should be epics. And if your team is not creating stories effectively, right? If they're not following the invest principle, I don't know if you guys have ever looked at story invest, right? If you guys aren't following the invest principles here of a story should be independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and testable, right? If you're not following these things, then your stories are going to be ambiguous most of the time, right? I'm generalizing here, folks. So, right. But for the most part, when we have very ambiguous, ginormous stories, this is where, if we're not careful, we run the risk of not being able to successfully complete our stories in time for the sprint to be finished, right? And so it really does. I think a lot of people usually ask, like, "Hey, Alex, my stories are always rolling from sprint to sprint," and the problem isn't that your team's not organized or that your team's not collaborating, right? It's usually like your stories are just really ill-defined, right? And so I would spend a little bit of time when you're going through your refinement sessions as a Scrum Master, which we'll talk about in a second. Really challenge the stories, right? Ask yourself, is this a well-written story? Does my team have everything they need to be successful with this story? Because just having the title is not gonna cut it for a lot of people. Some people need a little bit extra hand holding or a little bit more detail on those requirements to be able to effectively create or work off these stories effectively. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, a lot of questions are usually asked about, like, well, we're working off stories. What about the task, right? What about this? I don't know. Gather upgrade notes from team, right? So what happens when we have a task? What is a task? What's the difference between a task and a story in Jira? Well, that's a really great question. As far as Jira goes, the story and the task are siblings. They're brother and sister. And you should treat them, well, Jira treats them exactly the same. They're not special in any way, shape, or form. Where a lot of people get confused, especially for my CSMs in the room, it's the subtasks, right? Like, so when you are creating the work, when the work is being created, right? I keep saying you, but when the work is created, when the stories are created, it's important for you to understand, again, the differences between the different types of issues, right? Because stories should be value added, right? As you look at VAST in the VAST principle here, they're valuable, right? So stories, anytime you look at a story, it should move the needle. It should push forward your company, your team, progress, deliverable, right? The product's going to be better. That's what the stories are. The tasks are non-value added to the business, right? Stories are very valuable to the business. Tasks are going to be valuable to the team, but not necessarily to the business. Now, when you think about a subtask, how to deliver a story, that's different. That you go into the story and you are able to click this little square button here with the check mark and create like subtask one. And you should treat the subtasks like a checklist, right? You should treat them as a how-to guide. Now, something is wrong with my project settings here. You should, by the way, as a little aside, if you are automatically assigning your stories to a project lead, I would urge you to reconsider. Um, this is a very interesting thing to do because it overwhelms one person, and all the stories go to that one person. And I think they get so inundated by stories that are being created that they lose the effectivity. Because at the end of the day, a story is assigned to someone, and when they're assigned to someone, that's when they take ownership of it. So, anyways, that's the difference between the story, the subtask, and the task. Now, we have a couple questions here that say, hey, is there a way to create a template with epics and stories in order to import them to new projects? Out of the box, Pablo, no. Out of the box, no. But you can, and it is not sponsored by them, but you could, if you wanted to, um, leverage a plugin called Deep Clone, and that would let you take a predefined number of epics and stories and then copy them to another project, or just copy them within that same project. Again, not something that's built into Jira automatically. You do need to buy this capability. But the other thing I would tell you is a comment like this, Pablo, again, not to put Pablo in the spotlight here, but a comment like this is very dangerous for me, right? As a Scrum Master, this violates the rules of Agile, in my opinion. And let me tell you why. Because Agile is designed to be reactive on feedback. And so you start in a direction. Everything I'm telling you right now, everything I've been telling you for the last 35 minutes is like, hey, we need a heading. We need some sort of a direction. But you go in with the understanding that the plan may change and most likely will change. All the stories we planned for a sprint might not be relevant 2 weeks from now. And so it's very important that when you're following in the ways of Agile, it's very difficult to predict the future. And Agile is really designed to literally be a sprint to sprint, iteration to iteration experience, because the whole reason we go Agile, the whole reason we do the Scrum thing is we want to be reactive to, we had some assumptions on day one. We're going to work for 14 days and we're going to validate those assumptions, but also discover, or at least acknowledge, the discoveries we've made along the way. And before we engage in that next 14-day journey, we want to rethink about the plan. And so we want to make sure that we pivot and adjust accordingly based on the new data we're receiving 14 days later. Because 14 days ago, we were, I don't know that this is a bad word, right? But we were more naive 14 days ago than we are today, right? 14 days later, we have new information. We've made new explorations. And so it's silly to carbon copy that expectation we had 14 days ago and go over and over and over, right? And if your team has a boilerplate, right? Like if you can reliably, consistently, like say, hey, well, we're always doing the same work over and over and over, that's cool, right? This is a very specific use case. But most software teams, every day is a new day, right? And so you're not going to have a template here to to really reliably repeat the process, right? Because you shouldn't. Like every day or every sprint, you should learn new things and your plan should be adjusted. So that's that little soapbox for that day. Eliana says, can you explain pushing Jira tickets? Did I say pushing? What do you mean by pushing? Eliana, come back and ask me, what do you mean by pushing? Rashna says, can I estimate subtasks and will that show up in reports? No. So Jira at this point, so a couple of disclaimers here for Rashna here. Epics and subtasks, both of those don't count for anything in the backlog view. Only your stories, tasks, and bugs are important in the backlog view. So as a Scrum Master, this is great news because we only care about stories, tasks, and bugs. Subtasks are totally optional. Think of them as a checklist. They're just a checklist item. And so you can estimate them, but they will not roll up. They will not automatically increase the number on your stories. And if you're looking at when you're planning your sprint, which again, we're going to talk about in a minute, right? These numbers are only coming in from your stories, tasks, and bugs, not your subtasks. Tanush says, so who owns the stories? The product manager. So the product manager creates and owns the stories. We as a Scrum Master, we leverage those stories, right? But I was giving you that insight of like what a story should be, not so that you can go and create the stories, but so that when you're reading these stories, you got to remember, this is all a collaboration. It's all a negotiation, right? As a Scrum Master, you are not a secretary. You're not an assistant, right? You are allowed to have an original idea and an opinion about how things are doing. And as a Scrum Master, because you're the orchestrator, right? Because you're the conductor of that team, you have an ear to the ground, right? You have a bird's eye, not even a bird's eye view. You have a ground view. You can see exactly where the pain points are of the team because you're nested in there with the team. Your product managers are usually in some sort of a ivory tower, a little bit higher up, right? They don't get to see the daily struggles and the battles of the team, but you as a Scrum Master do. And so if you don't know what a good story is, it's hard to negotiate and push back on your product managers and go, hey, product managers, you're giving me vague requirements. My team's not able to do anything with this. So this is why I went down that little rabbit hole, because it's important when you value, when you grade the success of a Scrum Master, what is a great Scrum Master, right? Is it not to help the team complete their work in a sprint? Right? I mean, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and I don't want to get too philosophical on this one, right? But if your team is consistently pushing and missing their deliverables, they're consistently having to roll their stories over sprint to sprint to sprint, right? If just work is not getting done and you have no traction, then are you a good Scrum Master? Because your job is to give your team traction, right? So imagine going to an orchestra and everybody's kind of just doing their own thing with their instruments and it doesn't sound like music, it's just noise. You probably don't have a good conductor. So it's your job to harmonize the team, right? And the stories are your music sheets, right? And so you want these stories to be good, right? You want your stories to be something your team can understand so that your team can be effective. And it may require you to push back on your product managers and go, hey, you got to give us better stories. That's what all that was about. So I was asked in an interview, how many Jira tickets have I placed or pushed? Sorry, I did not explain in detail. So that's an interesting thing. So we'll talk about sprint planning right now. Actually, this is probably a good transition, Ileana. Let me see what we're gonna talk about next. Answers your question, but let's see. Let's jump into this. Okay. All right. So we have the stories, we have the issue types, we have everything. At this point, you should have a backlog with stuff in it. And so I'm just gonna complete my sprint here because we're gonna jump into the how do you plan a sprint? Okay. And let's see if Jira wants to be nice to me. It does not. It did not do what I told it to do. So let's move this manually, and we're going to start with the basics. So let me delete the sprint for now. All right. So here we are. We finally made it to our backlog, and even though I only have like 10 minutes to explain the rest of this, this goes much easier because I've spent the last 40 minutes on what you probably think is the worst 40 minutes of your life. But trust me, watch how easy, watch how trivial your job becomes as a Scrum Master when you have all your ducks or you have an understanding of everything I just told you, right? I'm not just like telling you stuff for the sake of telling you stuff. Like I genuinely believe in everything I just told you, and I use it when I'm orchestrating and coordinating my teams, and it makes my job as a Scrum Master like infinitely easier. So here we are in a backlog. A couple of things that you got to do in a backlog before we even go to sprint planning, right? You got to refine your sprint. So this is a negotiation between you and your Scrum Master, and I would even say your technical leads, where you look at every story and you validate, is it still relevant, right? Has anything changed since the last sprint, right, that we need to update? Because again, having a plan that we had a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, awesome, but so many things change on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, heck, even in an hourly basis, sometimes information can change. So it would be foolish. It would be foolish to accept your stories at face value and go, well, we thought the story was needed 6 months ago. It's now time to work on it. Let's work on it, right? Like you don't want to do that. You want to always question. You want to refine these stories. Make sure that they are the right stories that your team should be working on, right? And so again, this is a little bit more of a negotiation between your product owners and even your software technical leads, because they may have new information. So don't ever just like blindly bring stories into your sprint. Talk about them. You should have some sort of a grooming refinement session before your sprint plan with a couple of key stakeholders to make sure that this stuff's in order. Number 2, take advantage of the fact that your backlog is rankable, right? If you learn new information, you're like, hey, our customer, right? If we go back to our timeline and we're like, Android version update is the next most important thing we need to work on. Well, guess what? You can go to your backlog. You can go to Epic here. Notice that this list, the order of this list of epics is in the exact same order as it is in your timeline. And so I'm going to simply click on that button and go, look, here are my 3 stories that are with respect to that epic. Guess what? Now when I create my sprint, I can simply just grab these 3 items and drag them into my sprint, right? And so now my sprint planning portion has become so much easier because those items are already pre-ranked by that product manager and they're at the top. So I know that those are the next important ones, right? Same thing I can do when when I'm looking at my vendor dashboard, right? If I'm gonna do the next one, I'm simply gonna click on my epics, click on my vendor dashboard, and I'm gonna see that story and move that one into the sprint as well, right? And so now my sprint planning becomes so much more trivial because I know the order of importance, right? And so it's so important to understand again the value that those epics play in, because these epics here are the items that are important, right? They're the ones that need to go in there. And I can see the epic here. This text that we see on the screen here is the epic that it belongs to. This text over here is the release. So we can also see our releases, right? So it's very important, right? Your team is going to basically tell you, hey, this goes here, this goes here, this goes over here. And so now when you have things like this, right? When you are leveraging your epics and your releases in unison, check this out. We can now have educated conversations with our team and go, hey, team, these two items belong to epics that are high in the priority list, but their release is much farther down in the future. Does it make sense to spend energy, developer hours, calories, right? Effort, time? Does it make sense to spend that time on something that's due 30 days out? If the answer is yes, then maybe we refine this to make it specific, right? Now we can negotiate. Now we can have real good conversations about like, well, is this the right story then? Do we need to do something? Because the conversation would be like, well, you need to do this first. I'm like, great. Well, let's make a story for that, right? We can split the story right here. I can right click on it, split the story, and go prepare, right? This is like prepare to publish. And then this is the actual publish, right? And so I can split them. And once I split them, I can say, well, this prepare one really should be for August, right? So I can go over here, change my fixed version to August. And then this one can go back to the backlog because it's not going to go until September. And so now you can have these conversations because you have the labels, right? It's not just you showing up to a meeting and the loudest person in the room wins. Now you can use facts and data, your releases, your epics, heck, even your priority levels, right? These priority levels are very important. You can leverage these three things and go, hey, is this the right stuff we should be working on for this sprint? Because again, the information changes every single day. And if you rely on just like being in a meeting and somebody saying, well, this is the thing that we should be working on next sprint, memories are bad. My memory is like, I'll be the first to admit, I can't remember anything if I don't write it down. But putting it in Jira, right, you have these tools available. You have the fixed version. You have your epic. You have the priority. One thing we haven't talked about yet is we also have components. Which part of the system, right? So inside of Jira, Atlassian and the marketing over here. Yes. Inside of Jira, we can create components which represent the parts of your system, right? So we have an Android system that we can have, right? Inside of Jira, we can then associate our items with a component or part of our system, and we can see that this component right here, I'm gonna put it on this card, right? So I'm gonna come over here to my board settings. You get 3 fields for free, and we're gonna go to card layout if and when this thing decides to load, and I'm gonna add my component right here. Hit save. I'm gonna add it to my board as well. Hit save, right? And when I do all this, now I can see that component on my ticket. So I'm going to hit refresh so it shows up, right? So you can see this one right here belongs to Android. So when, again, I'm negotiating and we're like trying to figure out, is this the right thing we're supposed to be working on? Was this system critical? Maybe you're system driven, right? Maybe you're trying to fix a specific system and get that all polished. Well, you can see those components in your card. So when you're planning the workout, you can sort or at least look at your items that belong to a specific component, that belong to a specific release, that belong to a specific epic, that belong to a specific priority. And you can really now, using facts and data, negotiate this order. Right? Because it's one thing for somebody to just yell and say, this needs to be done. And there's a different thing with having that data in Jira so that when you're planning your sprint, it's just a drag and drop at that point. So that's basically what's going on here, right? So assuming that all of this is done, right? Assuming that you've leveraged your components, you've leveraged your fixed version, you've leveraged your epics, you've leveraged your priority field. The only thing you need to do when you're doing sprint planning is literally estimate everything, right? So everything should get story points. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. I would stop at 21, not go over 21. I also love Fibonacci. So if you're not using the Fibonacci method, you do whatever works for you. But the most important thing, the thing I will tell you as a Scrum Master, what you should definitely lock down and have, without a shadow of a doubt, everybody should have the same. I'll repeat that. Everybody on your team, across your company if possible, your directors, vice presidents, the president, the CEO, your scrum masters, your product owners, your developers, everybody should have the same understanding of what does a 1 mean, what does a 2 mean, what does a 3 mean, 5, 8, 13, so on. Because the numbers are irrelevant. It's the meaning behind those numbers that should be very consistent across your team. Because the moment that somebody doesn't have that, the moment that somebody doesn't have the same understanding and they look at a 1, somebody could look at a 1 and say, ooh, this is like an hour worth of work. Somebody can look at this and go, ooh, this is like a week's worth of work. Well, those are two very, very different expectations of reality, right? Of how much time or effort this particular story is going to take. So make sure that everybody in your team has the same understanding of what these numbers mean and what the numbers are or are less important. Hannah says, how would we go about how would you recommend bug or scoring bug tickets? Bugs are interesting. So earlier I made a comment and I said bugs are a Scrum Master's kryptonite. And I do mean that pretty passionately. Trying to find the right words. Right? And I mean that very passionately because bugs are very, very hard to predict. Right? You can't, it's scoring is easy, or estimating, for I guess we're using the right words, right? Estimating is very easy when the work is known, right? This is why this best principle is very, very understandable here, right? Because it's small, it's estimatable, it's negotiable, right? It's testable. But your bugs, it could be anything. They can be anything at all. And I would say the estimate that your team gives you, right? When you're looking at a bug, you should provide an estimate. That estimate's most likely going to be wrong, but your team should have some understanding of what that bug means and what it entails. Because what I have found over my experience is if your team has a hard time estimating a bug, your problem's not with the bug. Your problem is with your team not knowing what they're creating, right? Because if you have a solid like tech, like skill, competent, very like they know their stuff well, the bugs are much easier to identify and fix because they know their system. And so if you have a lot of bugs that are like that your team's struggling to estimate, your problem isn't like, oh my gosh, we need to get our team to estimate bugs better. Your problem is like we need to get our team to really understand their source code better, their code base better. Because those bugs are only hard to fix because they don't know how the heck it works in the system. So I would shift, if you're gonna firefight, I would shift to having your team get much better at what they're building than how to fix their bugs. Second thing would be if your bugs are always coming up, right? Like if they're really finding bugs a lot, like I would still take a timeout, right? You want to get ahead of the problem. Bugs are reactive, right? And so you want to be very, very careful. If your team has a lot of bugs, you want to understand like a root cause analysis for each bug. You want to have steps to reproduce for each bug, because when you have steps to reproduce, when you understand what caused the bug, when you understand in the bug where it was found, what caused it to be found, right? Like all the environment variables that were applicable to the bug, then your team can estimate a little bit better, at least a little bit more accurately, because they can go, oh, I see. I know how they created those bugs, right? And this is why I'm really excited about like that Loom partnership that Atlassian bought Loom, because a picture's worth 1,000 words and a video's worth like 10 million words for me, right? And so whenever possible, if you're whoever found a bug, if they can have like a recording or even pictures or screenshots of the bug, then it makes it so that you can estimate your bug a little bit easier because you have a little bit more data and context. So hopefully that helps, Hannah. All right, so we only have another minute or so left. So at this point, I'm just gonna wrap this training up here and just basically walk you through. Here we have our sprint. Assume that you've estimated everything. Just real quickly on assignees, if you don't assign, the wonderful world of Agile and Scrum say don't ever assign because we have self-organizing teams. I call BS on that. I've never in my entire life seen a self-organizing team that is so well skilled, so well oiled that they can just go, I'm gonna take a story and just pick off the backlog. Never seen that happen. Usually everybody's specialized. Usually somebody's really good at something, right? They help build a specific part of the system, or they're just really skilled at a specific part of the system, right? Or they're more comfortable with certain parts of the system. And so usually people will gravitate towards like stories that are like applicable to where they feel the most domain knowledge. And so to say that your entire team can work on all the aspects of your system, I've never seen it. But if you are that team, my hat's off to you, applause to you, because I've just never been privileged to work in such a high performance team. But most of the time I assign. So I will explicitly assign, because you also get an added benefit. So politics aside, right? The added benefit that you get when you do assign is you get these 3 dots over here. And when it comes time to, as a Scrum Master, trying to understand your capacity and go, hey, do we have the right amount of stories for our team? Well, this view here will show you each player, how many issues in total they have, and then how many total points they have. So this gives you a great view so that you can see based on historical data, am I tasking my team members just right, under, or am I over? And only if you assign the work will this picture pop up. Because if you don't, right, if you didn't have any assignees here, you don't get those 3 dots. So food for thought, again, before you get mad at me for saying assign your items, but that's just the food for thought. So once you've done all this, right, as a Scrum Master, your job is basically done. You start your sprint, set your dates. We're going to set a date for the future because Jira complains. You set your dates. 2-week sprints is my preference. Argument can be made for 3, but 2 weeks is where it's at. 1 is too short. 4 is ridiculously too long. 3 is pushing it, and 2 is where it should be at. So if you're not doing 2-week sprints, we should talk. But yeah, you're off to the races. So now your job is literally take these items from the left-hand side of your screen, and your team has to move them to the right. So I recommend your daily scrums every single day. Pull up Jira. Pull up Jira and understand, what is your team working on? Are they working on things that are not in your sprint? Big red flag. Are they working on things that they said that they're done, but the story's still in to do? They're not updating Jira, right? So pull up Jira to validate what they're saying, right? To make sure that your team is actively working and engaged with the item that you have entered in a commitment for. So that's pretty much it for this training here. Just going to go back to the PowerPoint here to close things up, because at this point you may be wondering, well, how do I take my skills to the next level? So the first thing you should do is scan that QR code if you didn't do it at the beginning. Follow me on LinkedIn. Everything is in there. I do have a brand new book that has been published about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. So if you want to take your skills to the next level and you're looking for a book, not on Scrum Masters, but more on DevOps, but if you want to help support the channel, definitely check that book out. Become a member. We have membership capabilities or opportunities here within the Jira Life. I highly recommend you subscribe to the Jira Live. Highly recommend you come back every single Thursday. We do a live stream. We have a 10-hour live stream coming up very, very soon, where we're going to be saying goodbye to Scott. If you guys don't know, Scott, one of the creators of Atlassian, one of the creators of Jira, is leaving Atlassian. And so we're just going to say goodbye. So join us on this 10-hour live stream in a couple of weeks. I have free courses, paid courses. I have a Udemy course. I have a merch store. We have so many different resources available for you. Everything's in that QR code there. So scan that QR code, and I'll see you in our next training. We have one for Jira admins next week. So if you're interested in that, make sure you stop by. Other than that, thank you so much for being here. Please hit that subscribe button, and hopefully I'll catch you in another live learning. See ya.